I'm Emma. I'm 39 years old, a financial advisor living and working in Seattle. Throughout my life, I've helped hundreds of people with estate planning and asset optimization, but I never thought I'd have to defend my own inheritance. It all began after my grandmother, Lucille Harper, passed away at the age of 87. She was the emotional backbone of the Harper family. A smart, tough woman who ran the family bookstore for nearly 40 years after my grandfather died young. She was the only one in the family who always stood by me, who taught me financial independence, and showed me how not to become a pawn in someone else's game. Her legacy wasn't just a century-old house in the Portland suburbs, but also a massive investment portfolio worth over $3.2 million, along with a 19th century heirloom jewelry collection. When our family attorney, Mr. Wallace, announced that most of that estate was designated for me, I cried. Not because of the money, but because I knew how deeply Grandma Lucille trusted me, and I promised I wouldn't let her down. But I forgot one thing. In this family, anything belonging to Emma always becomes a problem. A month after the funeral, I received a text from my mother. Family meeting next Sunday, important, be there at 2 p.m., non-negotiable. Life blunt, cold, just like every other message from my mother, Diane. The moment I read it, a chill ran down my spine. In my house, family meeting was always code for one thing. My brother Kyle had screwed up again, and I had to clean up the mess. It was never anything else. Kyle is 3 years older than me. Ever since we were kids, he was treated like the family's golden boy. Despite dropping out of school repeatedly, failing in business, getting divorced twice, and being addicted to online sports betting, my parents always found a way to rescue him. And me? I had to learn to be independent at 16, get my own scholarships, work while studying, and build my own financial firm from scratch. I thought maybe they'll recognize my effort. But no, I only got called in when there was a problem. And that problem was always named Kyle. I arrived on time to the meeting at the same house I grew up in, now a stage for emotional theatrics I no longer wanted to be part of. My mother, in her usual beige dress, sat formally beside my father. Robert, a retired civil engineer. Kyle sat at the end of the table, head down, eyes vacant. No one had to say anything. I already knew the meeting's purpose. And I was right. Emma, my father started, his voice trying to stay calm. Kyle is in serious trouble. He's over $280,000 in debt from football betting. He could be sued, or worse. We're a family, my mother cut in, her eyes piercing into mine. And families don't abandon each other. We've agreed to use Grandma Lucille's inheritance to pay Kyle's debt. It's the reasonable thing to do. I stood silent for a few seconds, my heart pounding like it was going to explode. They hadn't asked for my opinion. They didn't need my consent. They simply assumed my money was a tool to rescue Kyle. Once again. I looked at them, my voice hoarse with anger. You're going to use Grandma's inheritance, the one she left specifically to me, to erase gambling debt for a grown, reckless, and irresponsible man? That's what you call reasonable? My mother replied coldly. Lucille would want peace in the family. I clenched my fists, eyes locked on her face. No, she would want me to protect what she left behind, and protect myself from people willing to exploit family ties for personal gain. I knew that meeting wasn't a sudden shock. It was the final warning bell of a long chain of injustices I'd been swallowing since I was a child. My family always had one unspoken rule. Kyle was the center, and I was the one cleaning up the aftermath. When he dropped out of college at 20 to start a tech company without writing a single line of code, my parents applauded him. When I graduated from the University of Washington with honors, they simply said, "Well, girls are usually good at school." It went on like that. Kyle threw money into delusional projects, from opening a gym to selling NFTs, failing over and over. Meanwhile, I quietly built my financial consulting firm, paid off my student loans on my own, and never asked anyone for a single cent. When I was a child, I once asked my mother, "Why do I have to do all the chores while Kyle just plays video games all day?" She smiled gently. You're a girl. You can handle more. Kyle, he's more sensitive. We need to support him. I never understood when sensitive became a free pass for shirking responsibility. Throughout my teenage years, I learned to hide in the library or climb up to the rooftop to read alone, just to avoid Kyle's random fits of rage when he lost a game or got dumped by a new girlfriend. In those moments, my parents would just tell me, "Don't provoke him," even though I hadn't done anything. The older I got, the clearer it became. I wasn't their daughter. I was the pressure valve keeping the house from exploding. But luckily, I had one person who stood by me. The only one. Grandma Lucio. She was the one I could tell everything, from getting unfairly blamed by my mom to being forced to clean the kitchen every night while Kyle went out. She never scolded me for speaking the truth. She listened. And more importantly, she saw me. When I was 14, she gave me an old leather-bound notebook. Inside were pages filled with handwritten notes, formulas for compound interest, long-term stock investment strategies, and personal advice like, "If you know how to manage money, no one will ever be able to grab you by the collar. Love doesn't mean unconditional sacrifice." I didn't fully understand it then, but I kept that notebook with me like a miniature Bible. It was the first thing I packed when I moved out at 18. When I opened my first investment account at 19 with money I saved from working part-time at a coffee shop, she was the only one who celebrated with me. No one else in the family cared. At the time, Kyle was drowning in credit card debt from buying designer goods for his new girlfriend. And my parents? They were quietly paying off his debt and never said a word to me about it. It wasn't until I was 27, when I started offering financial consulting to some local business owners in Seattle, that I accidentally discovered just how deep Kyle's debt had become. He had filed for bankruptcy once, but the family handled it internally so no one found out. I remember crying in frustration when I cross-checked financial records and saw my parents' names listed as guarantors on a $60,000 loan Kyle took to launch a detox drink bar, which never opened a single day. I confronted my parents about it. Their response? "Why worry? You have money, you've never needed help, but Kyle, if we don't help him, who will?" That time, I stayed silent. But deep down, I made a mental note. One day, I won't be silent anymore. The family meeting was that moment. When my mother said, "Using Luciel's inheritance to help Kyle is the right thing to do," it felt like she was turning her back on the one person who had ever loved me unconditionally. But I knew. Grandma wasn't there to speak up. She had already prepared for this. I was sure of it, because just days before she passed, during a private conversation, she held my hand and said, "Emma, you're the only one in this family who truly understands the value of what I'm leaving behind, not because of the money, but because you've walked without needing anyone to hold you up. And that's why I trust you won't let anyone pull you back into the same cycle I spent my life trying to escape." I haven't forgotten her words, and I swore I wouldn't let them turn her final gift into a life raft for another round of Kyle's endless mistakes. After that family meeting, I couldn't sleep for 3 straight nights, not out of anger, but because I felt a chill in my bones. My parents aren't stupid. They know who I am. A woman who knows the law, understands finance, and isn't easily swayed by emotional manipulation. And yet, they boldly claimed they'd use Grandma's inheritance to save Kyle. That could only mean one thing. They were hiding something. And this had been planned in advance. I started following the clues they probably thought I'd overlook. The next afternoon, I stopped by Grandma Lucille's attorney's office, Mr. Wallace Freeman, to check on the progress of the estate distribution. Wallace is a seasoned man, 72 years old, and has been with our family since before I was born. But this time, he looked clearly uneasy when he saw me. "Emma, I was just about to call you. There have been some unusual document requests coming from your parents. They said you gave them indirect authorization." I froze. I never authorized anything for them. Wallace nodded and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it on the desk. Copies of access requests to estate records, property valuation reports for the Oregon house, a catalog of valuable personal assets, including Grandma's emerald jewelry collection, all attached with a notarized form bearing a forged signature. I picked up the paper, my heart racing. They had faked my signature. "Who notarized this?" I asked, my hand trembling. "A notary in Tacoma. Looks like they took advantage of an old connection," Wallace said quietly, his eyes filled with concern. I closed my eyes. This wasn't about family discussion anymore. This was a calculated plan to steal an inheritance. And the worst part was, I had no idea how many cards they were still hiding. That night, I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to Amanda's apartment. My best friend from college, and now an estate and trust attorney. Amanda isn't just sharp. She understands all the underhanded tactics even blood relatives can pull when it comes to inheritance battles. After hearing everything, Amanda sat in silence for quite a while. Then she said something that sent a chill down my spine. "And Emma, I'm afraid your parents are trying to establish a family trust, with themselves as trustees, and transfer all of Lucille's assets into it. If they succeed, you'll lose complete control." "But the will clearly names me as the primary beneficiary," I countered, though I knew Amanda hadn't finished. "If they can prove that you're not capable of managing the assets, or that the will was made under undue influence at the time of signing, they can petition the court to freeze the disbursement and place everything under shared control." I stood up, feeling like the ground beneath me was starting to crack. Clearly, they weren't just waiting for me to hand things over willingly. They had a backup plan. Legal coercion. Amanda continued, her voice now lower. "I heard something through the grapevine, not 100% confirmed, but it seems they're working with a new law firm in Bellevue, not Wallace. They might be trying to circumvent the process by requesting a formal review of the will's terms." I hissed through my teeth. "So they're planning to twist Grandma's final wishes just to bail out Kyle from a debt he got himself into?" "It's not just Kyle," Amanda said, her gaze serious. "If that debt came from private lenders or shady institutions, and your parents co-signed or borrowed jointly, they're facing financial ruin too. This might not be about saving Kyle anymore. It could be an attempt to rescue the entire family system, minus you." I stayed quiet for a long time after that. Everything started to make sense. Disconnected pieces from years past suddenly clicked into place. My dad always dodging financial conversations, my mom randomly asking if I was still single, then hinting about sharing home ownership. Kyle's out of nowhere pitches to invest in real estate even though he couldn't tell ROI from discount rates. All of it. A smokescreen hiding a bottomless financial pit they were desperate to cover at any cost. Even if it meant trampling Grandma Lucille's final wishes. Even if it meant betraying me. But I was ready. Because this time they weren't going to take down the one person they always thought was the weakest in the house. I left Amanda's apartment close to midnight, my mind spinning like a tornado of unfinished thoughts. Part of me wanted to scream the truth about what my parents had done. Another part held me still, cold, clear, focused. I knew that if they dared forge my signature once, they were fully capable of worse, and I couldn't wait for them to make the next move. The next morning, I scheduled an urgent appointment with one of Washington State's top trust attorneys, Eliza Grant, whom I'd met at a corporate finance seminar 2 years earlier. Eliza wasn't like the old-school family lawyers like Wallace. She was fast, sharp, and unafraid of confrontation. When I stepped into Eliza's downtown Seattle office, it took her only 15 minutes to grasp the situation from my summary. "We need to do 3 things at once," Eliza said, grabbing a pen and marking up her notes. "First, establish an irrevocable trust, with you as both the grantor and sole beneficiary. Second, transfer all of Lucille's assets into the trust before your parents can take legal action. And third, file for legal protection in case they attempt to interfere through civil channels. How long will that take? I asked. If you have all the asset documentation, we'll need 48 hours. No more. And so the engine kicked into motion. Eliza and I worked non-stop for 2 days, in a process where there was no room for error. Transferring ownership of the investment portfolio, worth over $3 million, into the newly created Lucille Legacy Trust account. Filing an emergency legal motion with the Pierce County Court to confirm the will's integrity and safeguard it from any revision attempts. Reporting the forged signature case to the state notary authority, not to press charges but to establish a legal record. And most crucially, transferring ownership of the Oregon home to the trust via an internal promissory deed, notarized in less than 24 hours. By Friday evening, just 1 day before the official family meeting, every asset Grandma had left no longer bore my personal name. They now belonged to the Lucille Legacy Trust, with me in full control. No one, not the court, not family members, not banks, could touch a single asset unless I said yes. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the signed trust agreement in front of me. On the table was Grandma Lucille's ruby ring, the only piece of jewelry I kept with me. I remembered her words when she gave it to me on my 30th birthday. You don't need anyone to protect you, Emma. But sometimes, you need an anchor to keep yourself grounded. Don't let them pull you away from who you are. I never fully understood that until today. The family meeting was held at Kyle's place, a rented penthouse apartment in downtown Bellevue. The irony was rich. The man who owed hundreds of thousands of dollars was still living in a place with a view of Lake Washington. My mother answered the door. Her perfume nearly made me gag. Still that same overpowering lavender scent she used to spray all over the living room whenever guests came, like a mask for the falseness beneath. Emma, you finally made it, she said, her tone sweeter than usual. Dad and Kyle are in the living room. We just want to talk as a family. I nodded and stepped inside. Everything was set up like they were in charge. One long table, 3 neatly stacked folders, and a luxury fountain pen placed precisely in the center. My father stood up, adjusted his shirt collar, and handed me a folder. We've spoken to our own attorney. If you agree to sign this, we can establish a new family trust, with your mother and me as trustees. All assets will be used responsibly, starting with handling Kyle's crisis. I looked at them, then smiled. The first real smile I'd had in a week, fueled only by resolve. Too bad, I said, placing a printed copy of the Lucille Legacy Trust on the table. I can't sign this, because all of Grandma's assets have already been transferred into an irrevocable trust. They're no longer under my name, and they're definitely not under anyone's control here. All 3 of them froze. My mother's mouth hung open. Kyle winced but said nothing. My father frowned and pulled off his glasses. What have you done? He asked, his voice tightening. I've protected Grandma's legacy, and this time, I didn't ask anyone's permission to do it. I stood up and turned toward the door. Mom, I said without looking back, if you're thinking about your next move, just remember, that trust is backed by 4 layers of legal protection, and so am I. I thought walking out of that meeting meant I had finally closed the book on all of this. But it turns out I had only opened the door to a truth I'd never known. 3 days later, I received a phone call from someone I hadn't seen in nearly 10 years. Uncle Alan, my mother's younger brother. His voice was hesitant but urgent. Emma, I just got back to Tacoma from California. I heard what's going on from Aunt Sharon. Can we meet? There's something you need to know. It's not about Kyle. It's about your parents. I agreed, though I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Uncle Alan and I had been close when I was little. He was the only one on my mother's side who didn't think I was too rational for a girl. But after a financial dispute with my grandparents, he moved to California and gradually cut ties with the family. That's why I was surprised he even called. We met at a small cafe near Lake Union under a soft afternoon rain. Uncle Alan stared at me for a long time, then set his coffee cup down. Emma, you think your parents are doing this for Kyle, right? But it's not that simple. Did you know they filed for bankruptcy a second time 3 years ago? I froze. No, I didn't. They seemed fine. Still traveling, still sending holiday gifts. Because they're surviving on rotating credit, paying off one card with another, and now they're facing legal threats from a private credit firm. The original loan was $160,000, but with interest and late fees, it's ballooned past $400,000. I was stunned. I didn't know how to react. The image of their stability, the power they always presented to me, crumbled piece by piece. They kept it from you, of course, because they knew you'd never agree to help if you knew the truth. So they used Kyle as a cover, because you'd go softer on him than on them. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat erratic. They used Kyle as a smokescreen? Uncle Alan nodded. Kyle does owe money, no doubt, but your parents co-signed his loans and added their own debts on top. It's been snowballing for years. They'd been living like there would be a day that saved them, and that day was when Grandma Lucille passed away. I went silent, replaying every moment my parents dodged financial talk, all the vague responses, the expensive gifts they sent me with reminders like, "Don't forget your family when your turn comes." None of it was love. It was hope invested in my grandmother's legacy. So, I said slowly, like I was peeling back the truth of a rotten secret, they've been planning this for a long time. Uncle Alan nodded. They tried borrowing money from me, but I couldn't help. When they found out most of the estate was left to you, they nearly panicked. They hired a new attorney, tried to amend the will, even filed psychological evaluations, trying to claim Grandma Lucille wasn't mentally competent when she signed. But your grandma was too smart. She saw this coming. I let out a dry laugh, a joyless sound. Yes, Grandma had prepared everything, but even she couldn't stop them from turning her legacy into a battlefield. Uncle Alan looked at me, his eyes heavy. Emma, I'm not telling you this to make you hate them, but you need to understand, you're not selfish for protecting what's yours. You're the only one in this mess who's still thinking clearly. I looked out at the lake, the gray water mirroring the weight in my chest. I suddenly remembered my mother's eyes during the last meeting. Not angry, but terrified. Terrified of losing everything. Terrified of losing the one last sliver of hope that might save them. And I realized, this time, they weren't just trying to save Kyle. They were trying to save themselves by dragging me down with them. But I wasn't going to fall. I stood up, shook Uncle Alan's hand, and walked away with a truth that stung and soothed all at once. I wasn't being cruel, I was surviving. I knew one thing for certain, silence only ever made things worse. If I didn't take the lead, they would keep pushing, justifying every shady move under the name of family. So I did something I'd never done in my 39 years of life. I was the one who called a family meeting. This time, not at Kyle's apartment and not at the old house in Tacoma. I rented a small conference room in a Seattle business center. No dining table, no teapot, no cozy armchairs. Just 4 straight-back chairs, a long meeting table, a projector, and a prepared set of documents laid at every seat. I sent out email invites with a clear subject line. Meeting on Grandma Lucille's estate, information and resolution plan. No pleading, no vague suggestions. Whoever came, came. Whoever didn't, it didn't matter. But they showed up. All of them. My dad entered first, tie tight, face stern as always. My mom followed, eyes scanning the room like a detective. Kyle came in last, wearing a hoodie and holding a giant cup of coffee like it was just another casual hangout. I stood at the head of the table, calm, no greetings, no small talk, just a nod and my opening words. Thank you for coming. I didn't call this meeting to ask for opinions. I called it to inform, clarify, and, if you're still willing, offer a path forward. The room went instantly quiet. I clicked the projector on, displaying a clear summary. Legal status of the Lucille Legacy Trust. Assets already transferred into the trust. Accompanying legal protections. And finally, an official declaration from the sole beneficiary, me. I will not override Grandma's wishes. She didn't trust me so I could be manipulated, or worse, enable a pattern of self-destruction. Her legacy is not a debt eraser. It's a reminder of dignity, resilience, and boundaries. My mother cleared her throat, but I raised my hand before she could speak. I'll finish everything first, then you can respond. I placed a stack of documents on the table, each page part of the 3-step plan I had carefully prepared with Eliza and Amanda. Step 1. Mandatory treatment for Kyle. You need to enroll in a behavioral therapy program for gambling addiction. No excuses, no delays. I'll cover the full cost, but only if you agree to monthly progress evaluations by a certified professional. If you quit halfway, every bit of support ends. Kyle didn't respond. He just stared at the table. Step 2. Restoring my parents' finances with transparency and reduction. I've asked an independent financial firm to do a preliminary audit of your financial status. If you agree to let them oversee your spending plan, I'll help cover part of the debt, up to $100,000, on the condition that you stop all new borrowing, cancel any secondary credit cards, and never again co-sign anything for Kyle. My mother's face began to flush, her lips tightened, but she said nothing. Step 3. Settling the debt through formal channels. We are not going to sidestep the law. I'm willing to pay for a lawyer to renegotiate with your creditors, but everything must be written down. No more unspoken family agreements. Every payment needs a receipt and transparent reporting. I paused, letting my words hang in the air. I'm not doing this to save anyone. I'm doing this because I'm the only one left in this family who knows how to say no when it counts. And if I don't draw the line today, there won't be anything left to protect. My father was the first to speak, his voice low. And if we don't agree to these terms? I looked him straight in the eye. Then I won't help at all, and I will use every legal measure necessary to ensure no one can access or interfere with any of the trust's assets, even if that means being hated by this family for the rest of my life. The room fell quiet, like someone had just smothered a lingering fire. Then Kyle spoke, quietly, and to my surprise, the most unexpected moment of the meeting. I'll try. I know I've pushed things too far. If you still have enough faith to set conditions, then I should at least have enough courage to follow them. My mother still said nothing, but I saw it in the corner of her eyes. Not tears, but recognition, bitter, belated. I nodded. No smile, no forgiveness, just resolve. Because sometimes healing starts with a shock, and boundaries are the best medicine. 6 months passed since that meeting, on a bleak but resolute December afternoon when, for the first time in my life, I drew a clear line between family and self-respect. I had expected a long, lonely silence to follow, but what came instead wasn't isolation. It was quiet, steady change. Bit by bit, person by person. Kyle was the first to surprise me. He began the gambling rehab program within the first week. At first, I assumed he was just performing to keep his benefits. But in the second month, when I received a progress report from the counseling center, one that read, "The patient is cooperative, openly sharing, showing positive attitude toward change," I cried. By the third month, Kyle began an internship at a nonprofit that supports youth struggling with gambling. He sent me a short email with no requests attached. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. Not with money, but with boundaries." I didn't reply right away, but I kept that letter, proof that sometimes boundaries are what pull people back from the edge. As for my parents, their transformation came slower, but it was no less real. My father, who always hid his emotions and viewed money as a form of control, agreed to have his assets and debts reviewed by a financial advisor. For the first time in his life, he signed a spending plan that had no room for face or pride. My mother, who used to steer everything through guilt and emotional pressure, slowly learned that affection is not a free pass to control others. She stopped sending expensive gifts with vague messages. Instead, I received a handwritten Thanksgiving card. Emma, I don't know if I did anything right in the past, but if you'll let me, I want to learn how to love you without hurting you, one step at a time. I placed that card in the left drawer of my desk, the place where I keep things that need time to be understood. And me. The woman once labeled cold, distant, too logical. For the first time in my life, I felt peace. I haven't changed my nature. I still live by principles, clear, cut, and practical. But now I understand that gentleness isn't weakness. And sometimes the deepest form of love is a firm boundary. Grandma Lucille's house in Oregon has since been lightly renovated into a small retreat space. Not for sale, not for commercial rent. I named it Lucille's Light, a tribute to the woman who gave me a light that never shouted but always shone steady. Every weekend, I spend a few hours there, reading her notes, watering the plants, repairing drawer handles one by one. Each time the wind rustles through the pines, I feel like she's still sitting by the window in her armchair, tea in hand, quietly smiling at me. Over the past 6 months, I haven't become the savior of the family, but I did save the part of myself that remained unbroken. And maybe that's what Grandma truly wanted to leave me. Not the money, but the power to choose. The choice not to be imprisoned by guilt. The choice to help without losing myself. The choice to love without collapsing under it. The day I left Lucille's Light and headed back to the city after my first winter holiday there, I looked into the rearview mirror and smiled. I had survived. I had stayed grounded. And I had protected the most important thing of all, the courage Grandma Lucille left me. Not written in a will, but pulsing in my blood. Emma's story is a powerful reminder that true inheritance isn't measured in money, but in the courage to set healthy boundaries with family. In real life, many people sacrifice their peace just to avoid being labeled ungrateful, giving endlessly to those who take them for granted. Emma shows us that love isn't about covering up someone else's mistakes, and real help must come with clarity. Sometimes saying no is the bravest act of love we can give our family. What do you think of Emma's decision? If it were you, would you have the courage to do the same? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt, powerful family stories.